My name is Greg Axton. At the beginning of DJA, which was 25 years ago, Mark Fagan was the first Chief Executive Officer.
So I'm Mark Fagan. I was the first Executive Officer of Action Resource Network, it was called. I started in November 1990 and I was appointed by a committee of 4 people who are consumers of the Spastic Society of Victoria. That's what it was then. People describe themselves as having severe and multiple disability, and they were looking for advocacy support and empowerment and an organisation that would be for them and promote their voice and their interest. So those 4 people were Arthur Edwards, Marie Ireland, Jackie Ryan and Andrea Milner.
Hi, I'm Marie Ireland. I was involved in the creation of DJA, or as T was called, it was CT, because a group from Scope wanted and believed an independent advocacy service was needed.
It was called the Consumer Union.
And they had had a whole thing going for quite a while around increasing the say of people with disability who are consumers of the Spastic Society having a say in the services that affect them and more generally in their life. And it was so the consumer unit was an internal kind of mechanism, but they had worked out that there needed to be an independent voice. So we wanted the committee to be very actively involved in the running of the service, and the committee was people who were members elected by the membership.
Looking back, we were all a bit naive around running an organisation. Our intentions and motivations were high, but we were rather maybe easily led, nevertheless we did our best.
So one of the first things we had to do is work out who Action Resource Network was for. And we quickly figured out that it was people who were having higher support needs associated with disability, that the voice of people with higher support needs who were dependent on services for all major activities of daily living, really felt like the promise of the International Day of Disabled Persons 1981 hadn't quite reached them yet, that they needed their own voice, and Action Resource Network went about being that voice.
I think gradually it made people with disability more confident to speak up about poor services and made services more accountable. Also, we were one of the first to involve people with disability on the management committee.
My name is Trevor Carroll and I'm the current Executive Officer at Disability Justice Advocacy. I was appointed here in October 2009, so we're coming up to towards my end of my 6th year. The 28 municipalities that we provide services for are all metropolitan municipalities in local government areas. And we've done some research based on the last census. And the statistics show that from the census that 3.1 million people live in those 28 municipalities, and of those 160,000 have a disability that would qualify them for our services. The funding agreement that we have that's been in place for the last 3 or 4 years requires us to provide advocacy for a client target of 80 a year. So 80 is small change when you're talking about a potential of 160,000. We can work within the funding we've got, but it means that many people miss out on advocacy because the money that we're allocated to employ staff, and we also use volunteers as well, doesn't go far enough to meet the demand. However, in 2013, we were granted permission by the Department of Social Services, or it was called FACSIA in those days. We were granted permission to include legal advocacy in our contract. So now we do a whole lot of work on legal advocacy as well as individual and systemic. Consistently over that period, since 2009, probably the biggest and the number one priority for most people is having somewhere safe to live. And at least 40% of all of our work during that period has been around accommodation.
The big issues affecting people with disability then are pretty much the same as they are now. Lack of access to public transport.
Lots of issues around life and accommodation and sheltered workshops and the imbalance of power.
Taxi services that were not fully accessible and were difficult when you needed to get somewhere and were expensive.
An increasing area of concern is neglect and abuse and assault of people with disabilities. Just over 17%, almost 17% of all of our clients since 2009 have been victims of abuse, neglect or assault.
The attitudinal stuff to people with disability that meant that opportunities were fairly restricted.
How would all the changes occur both in society and within people with disability without advocacy?
The three types of advocacy that we're funded for are individual, legal and systemic advocacy. And probably the most significant impact that we have is in terms of systemic advocacy. We're members of a wide variety of different organisations around systemic issues, such as, for example, the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission Disability Reference Group.
And really involving people in significant campaigns around public transport access, like the Catch a Train campaign.
We're also members of the Victoria Police Disability Portfolio Reference Group. We work with the Community Encounters program at Victoria Police, providing volunteers to help train the recruits in disability awareness. Like
the DARE Disability Action Rights and Equality.
We're also members of the Public Transport All Aboard VCOS group that looks at systemic public transport issues, and we've had significant success through legal advocacy and disability discrimination complaints in changing the system for the better. For example, we've managed to get proper wheelchairs at airports for a major airline to assist with mobility for people with disabilities to and from the check-in gates onto the plane. We've also had considerable success in getting hearing loops fitted in a government department right across the whole of Australia. We've had significant wins in relation to systemic advocacy and public transport.
Lots of groups that we started where people got actively involved in demanding better and demanding that they, in a quite modest ways, a fair go, which is the Australian tradition, we think, but was being routinely denied to people.
We're very heavily involved in the respite and relinquishment issue through the Respite Alliance Whittlesea. A major systemic outcome from one of our systemic advocacy campaigns has been the construction and start-up of a respite facility for people with disabilities in the city of Whittlesea. In 2010, we helped establish a community group called the Respite Alliance Whittlesea, and I've been the campaign spokesperson for that since 2010, and within 6 months of starting that group we had a commitment from the state government at the time to build, construct and outfit and staff a brand new facility-based respite centre in the city of Whittlesea, which was the first one ever built in the municipality.
I think one of the major things DJA ever did was the campaign to get trains, the train crossings. When Chris Jones died on the train, way back then there was a campaign for about 3 3 years to get level crossing. We're not all the way there yet, but we're nearly there.
So one of those really important issues still affecting people with disability was institutionalisation. What the government and the Department of Human Services decided was that a new institution should be built for 100 people, which was really at odds with all the reforms that moved to deinstitutionalisation. Deinstitutionalisation had been state policy since 1979. It had been a long-standing policy. So the decision to build a new institution was just terrible. And the way we set upon was an equal opportunity complaint under Victorian legislation. And what the decision to build a new institution for 100 people seemed to be saying, what it clearly said was that there were some people, because of their disability or high support needs, were not able to live in the community. That seemed, on the face of it, quite discriminatory, that because of their disability, and only because of their disability, they would be told, you have to live here. There was the Coalition Against Segregated Living, which was Leslie Hall from a Tenant Care Coalition, Pauline Williams, and we were the three key people, and other people provided lots of support. So Walter Collier, a good man who had lived at Sunbury, and then when that was deinstitutionalised, was moved to Janefield and then was moved to Kingsbury, had lived his whole life in institutions basically from being a young boy. And he said to me and Pauline and Leslie and Phil Grano at Philamanta too, and lawyers from Slaters and Gordon acting pro bono, just want a chance to live in the community. I just want a chance to live in the community. So Walter, under the Equal Opportunity Act, mounted an individual complaint of discrimination. At the same time, on behalf of Action Resource Network, I wrote to the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal and said, quite apart from Walter being told he has to live at the new Janefield, there are 99 other people who are going to be told they have to live there, and they're being discriminated against. So the Victorian government immediately tried to stop these actions and used a whole lot of technical legal arguments, all of which were unsuccessful, but we went backwards and forwards to the Supreme Court, I think it was 5 times over the next 5 or so years, arguing the case that that Walter's case should be heard and that this investigation should be conducted by the Equal Opportunity Commission. And we were successful. Sad that the delaying tactics of the government meant that the institution meanwhile was built and is still operating today as plenty residential services. The people that were found to be discriminated against were still living there. Walter died at Plenty Residential Services. He never had his chance to live in the community.
I feel people now are more assertive, but they still don't know how to go about getting what they want. Some people will always need someone to support them.
This is why advocacy is funded, because of recognition of that to enable the human rights of people, some people will need advocacy support, and sometimes people will need advocacy support for maybe the whole of their life, and that should be seen as okay.
I'd like to think while our work in some small way led to the NDIS.
We were part of the push for the NDIS. Lots of coalitions were talking about our long haul strategy and what we needed, and hypothecated taxes and the need for support that was delivered rather than an empty promise and just a waiting list. So it just shows that long haul advocacy, and even when you undertake those kind of actions, it's still really difficult to achieve outcomes. And as much as you do and as effectively as you do it, we're not ultimately the decision makers in advocacy. We do bring all our persuasive efforts and moral arguments and legislation and human rights and all the instruments and all the law that actually backed us up. But Walter still died at Plenty Residential Services, living there.
I believe people with disability are more aware of rights and have higher expectations, but unfortunately advocacy is still needed by some.
We've got to become relevant to the next generation.
So individual advocacy will always be needed.
Expectations of what we want are higher, and rightly so.
I would like to see people being able to be who they are.
The future of advocacy depends upon what's going to happen with the NDIS, because a lot of the state government structures that exist around disability have an uncertain future under the NDIS. We don't know what will happen to many of them.
But there are times that every person needs advocacy. Every person needs advocacy. Some people just need it a bit more and more frequently.
One of the major issues is that while this review was on, all advocacy agencies that have been funded under the National Disability Advocacy Program have only had their funding contracts extended by 1 year until the 30th of June next year. So there's still a fair bit of uncertainty around what will happen to disability justice advocacy and other agencies like ours in the future.
I would say in some ways advocacy has come a long way, but in other ways we've still got a long way to fight.
25 years in, we've got probably another 25 years to go. The NDIS, the early signs are good.
Look, I think as far as working in disability justice advocacy is concerned, it's a fantastic place to work. We've got a really wonderful team of advocates, which includes paid staff and volunteers. We have a really, really exciting board that works very hard towards getting all of our strategic plan implemented and governing the organisation. We have almost 300 members, individual members and organisational members. So disability justice advocacy is going ahead in leaps and bounds. We could do even better with more funding. And I'm particularly delighted that we've formed a partnership with Morris Blackburn Lawyers, which means that many of our clients that require legal support for personal injury, it means we've got a ready-made organisation with all of the expertise, knowledge and skills that we can refer our clients for, because we're not funded to provide that sort of advocacy. So forming that sort of partnership has been a big boon, not just for us and also Morris Blackburn Lawyers, but also for our clients who have personal injury issues. So partnerships, I think, are the way to go in the future, and we'll just have to wait and see what the NDIS brings.
My DJA have another 25 years.
Nice.
Bye.